The man tightly grasped the ruby in his hand, and thunder and lightning immediately concentrated in his palm. A storm suddenly swept across the sea. It is said that the blood of Elizabeth and the tears of Dracula formed 13 rubies with special powers. Whoever possesses these rubies will gain immense strength. However, during a war between vampire clans, many of the rubies were lost, leaving only a few in the possession of certain families. One of these is held by the Vamalia clan, a vampire family in Germany. They concealed their identities and lived in a small town, feeding their bodies with fresh blood every day. They stayed indoors all the time and were forbidden from going outside. Occasionally, a bird would fly into the house, and each time, the girl Alisa would be very happy. She could no longer endure this life of captivity. So, when her father was not home, Alisa secretly opened the window. Although her younger brother tried to stop her, she was determined. Alisa climbed onto the roof and happily waved to a boy passing by her house. She ran and jumped in the night, and by chance, she encountered a human boy who was holding a book. Alisa really liked this author. The two of them had a delightful conversation, but when the boy took her hand, Alisa couldn't control herself and revealed her fangs. She quickly turned her head away and lied, saying she had a toothache. Upon hearing this, the boy jumped into the house to find medicine for her. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Alisa ran away. She dashed through the thick fog to a bustling street. She picked up an orange to examine it, unaware that items on the stall had to be paid for before being taken. The shopkeeper grabbed Alisa's hand, and she instinctively bared her fangs to threaten him. Realizing she was a vampire, the shopkeeper immediately shouted for help. Alisa hurriedly fled, with someone chasing her while holding a crucifix. She had no choice but to climb the wall and sneak through a window to get home. This incident also exposed her family's hiding place. Alisa panicked and apologized to her father. When her father looked outside, he saw a crowd gathering downstairs. He quickly ran to wake her grandmother, who was lying in a coffin. The grandmother caught the familiar scent of garlic and silver. The Red Mask group, known for hunting vampires, had arrived. At that moment, Alisa's younger brother pulled her aside and asked why she was so interested in the outside world. Alisa hesitated and didn't want to reveal the truth, but her younger brother kept pressing her with questions. In the end, she had no choice but to take his hand and place it on her chest. It turned out that Alisa had a heartbeat like a human. At this moment, Alisa's father discovered Calvina, a renowned vampire hunter. Realizing the situation was critical, their grandmother activated the ruby stone to send a distress signal to Magnus. Then, she used a candle to set the curtains on fire and urged the family to leave immediately. While they were escaping, Alisa suddenly felt a sharp pain. Her left hand began to glow, and strange images flashed into her mind. Deep in the forest, an old man awakened from a coffin, murmuring, "The flame has awakened me again." Before Alisa could process anything, the Red Mask group broke into the house. She quickly ran upstairs and hid in a corner. The Red Mask members entered the house and picked up a family photo. It turned out that the man Alisa had known as her father was not her biological father. He was merely a servant of the family. It was said that Alisa's parents had gone outside to bathe in the sunlight. Just as Calvina was about to discover Alisa, one of her subordinates arrived to report that they had found a tunnel. Calvina called everyone to head downstairs. Thinking everyone had left, Alisa was about to step out when she encountered a member of the Red Mask group. She quickly ran to the attic, but he chased after her with a knife, threatening her. Alisa lied, claiming she was human and had only entered the house out of curiosity about what was happening. Surprisingly, he believed her. However, as Alisa nervously glanced at the mirror beside him, he followed her gaze and noticed that her reflection was missing. Realizing she had been exposed, Alisa swiftly kicked him away and escaped through the attic window. She jumped onto the street and ran desperately. Unfortunately, she was caught by another member of the Red Mask group. Luckily, this person turned out to be Alisa's adoptive father. It seemed that Alisa had awakened an old man. On his hand was a ring set with a ruby stone. The old man sensed that someone was secretly watching him. Shortly after, the light disappeared. Alisa's adoptive father recognized it as a spark of power, but refused to explain its meaning to her. He simply instructed her to keep this ability hidden, promising to reveal the truth when the time was right. After saying this, he pulled her away. They quickly regrouped with Alisa's grandmother and younger brother. Magnus, who had received the distress signal in time, arrived to pick up the family. By the time Calvina caught up, Alisa and her family had already safely boarded the ship. However, Calvina was determined not to let this group of vampires escape. Returning home, Calvina instructed her son to pack up their belongings and prepare to leave. Interestingly, her son was none other than the boy Alisa had encountered earlier. His name was Niku. It seemed Niku wasn't entirely supportive of his mother's crusade, reluctantly gathering their things to join her. Meanwhile, Alisa curiously gazed around, taking in her surroundings. The people on the ship looked at them coldly. Alisa's grandmother grandmother took her aside and warned her to be cautious while on the ship. However, later that night, Alisa's palm began to glow again, and she caught another glimpse of the old man. He took a bat out of a cage and let it kiss the ruby ring on his hand. In an instant, the bat transformed into a human. The old man threw a cloak over the Batgirl, and through their conversation, it became clear that the old man was Dracula himself, who had been in a deep slumber for over 300 years. The ruby stones of the clans were revealed to be forged from Dracula's tears and Elizabeth's blood. At this point, the light suddenly vanished. Alisa stepped out of her coffin, wrapped a piece of cloth around her glowing hand, and quietly made her way to the deck. Experiencing a sense of freedom she had never felt before, she was overwhelmed with excitement. Suddenly, a young man pulled her into a corner and used telepathy to speak with her. He warned Alisa not to let Magnus catch them wandering around. Among all the clans, only the Dracus family could read the thoughts of others. This family was cruel and brutal. Suddenly, Alisa no longer felt any sympathy for the young man in front of her, especially towards their leader, Magnus. He was known for plundering many ruby stones during the war. The young man, hearing Alisa's thoughts, angrily declared that he was Magnus's son. Alisa, embarrassed, apologized, but the young man remained furious and immediately went down to the lower deck. Alisa's adoptive father then pulled her back to their room. As Alisa was about to go to sleep, the strange light appeared again. At that moment, Dracula was crawling on a statue of Elizabeth. He was determined to find all the ruby stones to revive the woman he loved. Dracula handed his ring to the bat, Tonka, and ordered her to go aboard the boat to collect the ruby stones. If the mission succeeded, Dracula would release all the bats. Tonka swallowed the ring and transformed, flying into the sky. Alisa, witnessing this, realized that the ship was in grave danger. Suddenly, a blue-eyed boy approached and said that the ship had stopped at the shores of his family's estate. The boy invited Alisa to join him for a meal. Meanwhile, Alisa's younger brother was petting a rat. The other children from different clans looked at Alisa with disdain. Lars, Magnus's son, told Alisa to introduce herself. When Alisa spoke her family name, they mocked her even more, belittling her clan. The blue-eyed boy defended Alisa, saying a few words in her favor. He then threw a Bible into Lars's hands, which immediately caused Lars's hands to burn from the touch. The boy, unfazed, calmly picked up the Bible. He was Luciano, the heir of the Nosferus family, and he was not affected by the Bible's power. Lars, furious, used magic to lift Luciano into the air. Lars's two sisters laughed at the scene, while Malcolm, sitting at the table nearby, decided to join in the fun. He used a bolt of lightning from his palm to blow the hair of several girls. One of Lars's sisters, enraged, charged at Malcolm, ready to fight. Alisa was not about to back down. Determined to protect Luciano, she bravely jumped into the fray and attacked Lars. The dining hall instantly descended into chaos until Magnus angrily shouted for everyone to stop. The children reluctantly returned to their seats. The clan leader then stood up to speak. Originally, there had been 13 clans, but after the war, only 5 remained. The Nosferus clan in Italy, the Dracus clan in Norway, the Virid clan in England, the Pyrrhus clan in France, and Alisa's clan, the Vamalia, in Germany. In order to unite against the Red Mask group and fight for a future of peace and prosperity, they decided to establish a school where all heirs would study together, sharing the abilities of the 5 clans. At the same time, Tonka flew toward the ship. The children were saying their goodbyes to their families when Tonka noticed the ruby stones. She immediately reported this to Dracula. Unexpectedly, Dracula's shadow appeared. It turned out that Dracula possessed the ruby stone of the Tonka clan, which allowed his shadow to move freely, constantly following and monitoring Tonka. Tonka, in her true form, hid in Magnus's carriage to follow the group. Meanwhile, the heirs on the ship began their lessons. Alisa was eager for the new lessons to begin. The first skill they would learn was how to resist sacred objects, a skill belonging to the Nosferus clan. The assistant teacher for today's lesson was Umberto. He opened a chest and muttered a spell under his breath, then picked up a cross with his bare hands. The children recoiled, baring their fangs in fear, but Luciano, after chanting the spell, was able to hold the cross as well. Malcolm, feeling bored, didn't want to stay in the class. He asked Lars to use his powers to make the chest fall. Taking advantage of the chaos, the two of them left, but Alisa saw everything. Before leaving, Lars warned Alisa not to reveal this secret to anyone. Soon after, the class returned to normal. The principal, standing nearby, suddenly received news from Magnus. Magnus had been ambushed by bats and lost a ruby stone. The children, unaware of the danger that was about to strike, continued to obediently listen to the lesson. At that moment, Umberto noticed that 2 students were missing. Lars and Malcolm had disappeared. He turned around and asked Alisa, who was sitting nearby, but she remained silent. With no other option, Umberto took Alisa to the principal. Reluctantly, Alisa told the truth. Meanwhile, the 2 mischievous students were walking down the street. Malcolm raised his hand and used a bolt of lightning to manipulate the clouds, concentrating them over a group of female students. To avoid the rain, the girls ran into a nearby building. Malcolm and Lars, amused by the situation, followed them. They didn't realize, however, that the building was a church. The two of them began feeling dizzy and exhausted, collapsing to the ground. The nuns, thinking they were possessed, took out holy water and began sprinkling it on Malcolm. Just at that crucial moment, the Countess arrived, hypnotized the nun guarding the door, and took Lars and Malcolm away. The principal punished them with a week of duties, and Lars glared at Alisa with resentment. After everything settled, Alisa went to apologize to them and even volunteered to help clean up. Lars couldn't understand what Alisa was thinking and decided to read her mind. However, what he saw was Dracula inside Alisa's thoughts. Before Lars could ask, Alisa was taken away by her adoptive father. Unlike Alisa's grandmother, her adoptive father stayed behind to look after her. Once they returned to their quarters, Alisa was called by the Countess. She revealed that she knew Alisa's mother and even knew that Alisa had a heartbeat. Alisa, filled with turmoil, returned to her coffin. This time, she unexpectedly ended up in Dracula's lair, a tavern. Dracula, sensing her presence, recognized her as the one who had been secretly watching him. He struck Alisa with force, sending her flying back to her original place. Alisa awoke from her coffin, while Dracula drained the blood of everyone in the tavern, gradually restoring his youthful appearance. He walked to the reception desk, woke up a man, and ordered him to help find the ruby stones. Dracula was about to tell the man where to go when he suddenly sensed that Alisa was watching him. In response, he immediately severed the connection, preventing Alisa from obtaining any crucial information. Just then, someone knocked on the coffin. As soon as Alisa opened the lid, Lars's sister poured an entire bucket of water over her head. Alisa bared her fangs and lunged at them, but she was no match for them and had no choice but to take the beating. Later, during class, Alisa sat in a daze, staring at her notebook and recalling the last time she saw her mother. It seemed like her mother's hand had also emitted light. The principal noticed that Alisa was not focused and called her to stand up, asking her to introduce her clan's abilities. Alisa found it hard to speak about it. The power of a vampire clan was supposed to be love, and saying it aloud would surely make others laugh. As expected, the other students mocked her abilities. The principal instructed Alisa to sit down and pay attention, then proceeded to introduce the powers that were inherent to the 13 clans. The principal mentioned the Tova clan from the Netherlands, known for their ability to swim, which was a useful skill for vampires who couldn't normally swim. At that moment, Dracula, accompanied by his slave, was rowing a boat. He sensed the presence of a ruby stone from the Tova clan and ordered his slave to dive into the water to retrieve the stone for him. Alisa, unnoticed, saw everything. Lars noticed that Alisa seemed troubled and used his ability to read minds to pry into her thoughts. However, what he found were memories of Alisa's mother. Alisa quickly realized Lars was reading her mind and immediately stopped him. She grabbed her plate and left the dining hall, heading to the servant quarters to find her adoptive father. There, she pressured him to tell her more about her mother's life. Her adoptive father explained that Alisa's father had died in the war between the clans, and her mother couldn't bear the pain of losing her beloved. Her mother decided to distance herself from the world under the sunlight, and Alisa couldn't understand. Was this truly love? She then asked her adoptive father about the light in her hand, but he refused to explain, telling her only to keep it a secret as the light would find its next rightful owner. Alisa, frustrated by her adoptive father's refusal to tell her anything, argued with him before storming off. Alisa returned to her classroom, opened her cupboard, and took out a bottle of holy water. She intended to teach Lars's two sisters a lesson, so she switched their perfume with holy water. The next morning, when they sprayed the perfume, the holy water burned them, just as Alisa had planned. Lars knew it was Alisa's doing, but didn't expose her immediately. Meanwhile, the principal handed the ruby stone to the Countess, asking her to keep it safe for him. Tonka, who had been quietly watching, reported the event to Dracula. However, Dracula ordered Tonka to halt the plan to steal more ruby stones for the time being. Tonka was instructed to monitor Alisa closely to figure out who she truly was. At that moment, a girl appeared on the ship with a wolf, causing immediate tension as everyone revealed their fangs. Wolves had been extinct for a long time, and they suspected she might be a shapeshifter. The girl introduced herself as Ivy, a descendant of the Lacana clan. The principal didn't believe her, so he took Ivy into custody. However, Lars used his mind-reading ability to confirm that Ivy's words were true. Ivy explained that the wolf beside her wasn't a pet, but her older brother Seymour. The principal agreed to let Ivy stay at the school. While most others harbored resentment toward werewolves, Alisa took the initiative to be friendly with Ivy. The two quickly became desk partners. Ivy asked to borrow Alisa's notebook to copy notes, and Alisa eagerly lent it to her, not realizing that her notebook contained drawings related to the sparks and illusions she had been seeing. Tonka, standing nearby, saw the notebook and its contents. Today's lesson was about distinguishing between different types of vampires vampires, which were broadly categorized into two types: bloodline vampires and shadow vampires. Bloodline vampires are those born as vampires, descended from Dracula. On the other hand, shadow vampires are humans who are turned into vampires. These vampires lack supernatural powers and must obey the bloodline vampires. Lars directly referred to shadow vampires as slaves, which Alisa didn't appreciate. The two of them argued by reading each other's thoughts. Ivy, seeing this, asked if Alisa and Lars were lovers. Lars, slightly embarrassed, didn't know how to respond, while Alisa quickly denied it. As the day came to an end, Alisa, who had finally made a new friend, enjoyed talking with Ivy. However, that night, Alisa lay in her coffin, unable to sleep. The light on her hand didn't appear either, and she had no understanding of how to use it. She decided to go to the library to find some books to read. She woke Luciano to ask where the library was, and he agreed to draw her a map. Lars, overhearing their conversation, secretly followed them, and Tonka, not willing to be left out, immediately flapped her wings and followed behind as well. However, what Alisa didn't know was that the greatest danger wasn't Lars or Tonka, but that Calvina's group had also arrived. Alisa followed the map to the library, while Tonka flew to a nearby building, transformed into human form, and began watching Alisa's every move through the glass. Alisa was searching for books related to Dracula, and unexpectedly, she found one. Just then, Calvina's son, Niku, also entered the library to buy a book. The two of them were delighted to see each other again. Lars, seeing this, felt a bit jealous. Niku invited Alisa to dinner, and the two of them happily left the library together. Tonka reported the book to Dracula, who seemed to realize that it contained something very important. Dracula ordered Tonka to destroy the book immediately. Meanwhile, at the restaurant Niku chose, which was located under the sunlight, Alisa didn't want to refuse Niku's invitation and decided to go there, holding an umbrella to shield herself from the sun. The two sat at the dining table talking, and while ordering, Alisa spoke entirely in Italian. Niku was impressed by her linguistic skills and, excited, grabbed Alisa's hand. Lars, enraged and unable to stand it any longer, immediately left the restaurant. He even passed by Tonka without noticing her. Tonka entered the kitchen, captured a waiter, put on her uniform, and began going outside to clean tables. However, the chef noticed the corpse on the ground and screamed loudly. Realizing the situation was deteriorating, Tonka grabbed the book and fled. Alisa and Niku chased after her. While running down the street, they were stopped by the police. Alisa and Niku were temporarily arrested. At that moment, a police officer entered and mentioned that the murdered waiter had been stripped of his clothes. Alisa deduced that the culprit was the one who had stolen her book, and she suspected that the person might not even be human. Alisa knew she had to escape quickly. Niku was about to use a pin to unlock the door, while Alisa used her strength to break the bars. Knowing that such strength was abnormal, she quickly put the bars back in place and told Niku that the bars were broken, but she couldn't fix them alone and needed his help. Niku hesitated, but when he tried, he used just a little force and the bars came off easily. Alisa took the opportunity to compliment him on his strength. The two successfully climbed through the window and escaped. They ran through narrow alleys, but before they could go far, Alisa saw the police clashing with the Red Mask group, with Calvina among them. Alisa realized she had to return to the ship quickly, but Niku couldn't bear to part with her. He hugged her and promised they would meet again tomorrow. This was the first time Alisa felt warmth, and at that moment, the light on her hand appeared again. Alisa then found herself opening a stone cavern and walking toward a rope. She grabbed the rope, and immediately, she was transported to a beach. Alisa was surrounded by her loved ones and friends. Even her parents were there. A single tear fell from her eye, and she was utterly panicked because vampires were not supposed to cry. When Alisa approached the ship, she saw the headmaster taking a roll call of everyone aboard. A few hours earlier, the head of the police department had spoken with the headmaster, and they had come to an agreement. As long as vampires didn't harm humans, the police chief would stay out of their business. However, the death of the waiter had disrupted this delicate balance. The headmaster now wanted to take a roll call to find out who was responsible for the murder. At that moment, Ivy approached Lars, asking him to help Alisa cover up her secret trip outside. Ivy knew Lars liked Alisa. Although he appeared cold on the outside, he was actually a kind person. Without hesitation, Lars went up to Alisa, instructing her to board the ship from the side. Alisa followed his instructions, and her foster father, unable to find her, became worried. However, shortly after, Lars confidently walked onto the ship, drawing everyone's attention. Alisa took the opportunity to blend in with the crowd while Lars was confined. Umberto entered the holding cell, carrying a chest, intending to use this moment to torment Lars. He pulled out a crucifix, but Lars quickly muttered an incantation, having fully mastered how to resist holy objects. However, Umberto then revealed a silver crucifix, which Lars couldn't withstand, and he began to panic. Fortunately, the Countess arrived just in time and escorted Lars to the office. The headmaster master measured the distance between Lars's fangs and found it didn't match the wound on the victim, thus excluding Lars from being a suspect. Meanwhile, Ivy urged Alisa to come clean about her actions outside the ship. Alisa reluctantly admitted she had encountered a vampire who had bitten someone, but withheld further details. Just then, her foster father angrily arrived and dragged Alisa away. Ivy, seeing the situation diffuse, breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Ivy, too, was hiding some secret she didn't want others to know. Alisa's foster father confronted her, demanding to know why she had left the ship, asking if she had drunk human blood. He reminded her that vampires under 18 were forbidden from feeding on humans. Alisa, angered, denied drinking blood, but confessed that she nearly kissed a human. Realizing she had let slip too much, Alisa admitted that she had become friends with a human boy. Her foster father, upset, blamed himself, revealing that he had recently been distracted and had not been taking good care of her. Alisa sensed something was wrong and asked further, only to learn that her foster father had fallen in love with Rafaela, a vampire from the ship. However, vampire law forbade relationships for vampires, especially for those who were shadow vampires like Rafaela. They had promised to keep this secret. Meanwhile, Ivy approached Lars, revealing that Alisa had encountered a vampire in the town and that the vampire was from the Upiri family. It turned out that Tonka, who had been following Alisa, was also from the Upiri lineage. The pink gemstone Dracula had given Tonka belonged to Ivy's family. At this moment, Alisa went up to the deck, and Ivy was about to strike up a conversation when Alisa's hands suddenly began to glow. Alisa was drawn into a vivid vision where she saw Dracula gripping a rope and entering a beautiful illusion on a beach. Alongside Dracula was a stormy sky, and Alisa's parents disappeared in that storm. Alisa woke from the dream with tears streaming down her face. What was even stranger was that Dracula's eyes were slightly wet as well. He wondered what exactly Alisa's abilities were. Alisa, unsure of how to explain herself, rushed down to the lower deck, only to be caught by the Countess, who took her to the office to have her teeth measured. The result showed that Alisa's teeth did not match the murderer's. Back in the classroom, Ivy and Lars approached Alisa, assuring her that they would keep her secret about crying. Lars revealed that he knew the light Alisa saw was the spark, a powerful force that could destroy even vampires. Magnus had once told Lars about the power of the spark. At that moment, the Countess entered the classroom and announced that everyone had been checked, and the murderer was not among them. However, she didn't realize that Tonka was already aboard the ship, having transformed into a rat and hidden in the classroom. Today, the class would be learning about the abilities of the Pyrrhus family from France, specifically their ability to communicate with animals. The lesson would be taught by Joanne, the heir to the Pyrrhus family. Malcolm, however, looked down upon this ability. The Countess immediately dragged him to the window and opened the curtains. The sunlight burned Malcolm, causing him to scream in pain. Joanne released a swarm of moths and slowly recited a spell. The moths quickly swarmed the window, blocking the sunlight and saving Malcolm. The Countess reminded him to remember the lesson well. After class, Alisa's group headed down to the lower deck of the ship. Ivy told Alisa that she had seen Dracula transform Tonka into a human and forced Tonka to swallow a ring. Ivy chased after Tonka onto the ship. Originally, Ivy had planned to find the ruby and leave without caring about the people aboard, but Alisa's attitude made her reconsider. Ivy agreed to stay and help Alisa uncover the mystery. Alisa mentioned that someone was trying to steal the ruby for her foster father to get his attention, but right now, he was preoccupied with Rafaela. Alisa reminded them to be more modest, but her foster father insisted that when attending the family conference, he would ask for permission for vampire slaves to be allowed to love. This could potentially lead to Rafaela's foster father being accused, but he was so deeply infatuated that he couldn't break free from it. Alisa, angered, stormed out, and her foster father chased after her, hoping she would understand his feelings. Alisa was shaken by his words. Meanwhile, a scream came from the room where Rafaela had gone to confirm whether the ruby was still there. Alisa ran after the bat that had fled outside the ship, but when she and her foster father arrived, they found Rafaela already dead. In the chaos, the Count and his wife woke up late and assumed that Alisa's foster father was responsible for Rafaela's death, ordering their subordinates to imprison him. Deeply grieving over the loss of Rafaela, her foster father no longer wished to live and voluntarily accepted the punishment of being exposed to the sunlight the following morning. Meanwhile, Alisa went to the town but lost track of Tonka. Unexpectedly, she ran into Niku and Calvina, who invited her to their house for a meal. Alisa, nervous about her vampire identity being exposed, however, during the visit, she accidentally discovered that Niku also had the same book that she had seen before. Sensing that Alisa might be hiding something, Calvina deliberately took out a necklace with a cross-shaped pendant and handed it to Alisa. This triggered a reaction as the cross burned Alisa's hand. In a panic, she quickly recited the incantation she had learned in class to protect herself. Alisa was surprised to find that the cross actually worked, and after putting it on, Calvina seemed reassured and gave her approval for Alisa and Niku to start dating. Alisa, feeling uncomfortable, quickly handed the necklace back to Niku. Just as they were enjoying their conversation, Ivy rushed in to speak with Alisa. Alisa told Ivy to wait for a moment, then kissed Niku before following Ivy. The news of her foster father's impending execution weighed heavily on Alisa, and she rushed to confront the headmaster to demand justice. However, the headmaster insisted that she provide evidence to prove that her foster father didn't commit the murder. Meanwhile, Lars, using his ability to read minds, discreetly probed those present and discovered that the headmaster had long known about the plot to steal the red gemstone. The punishment of her foster father was merely a cover-up to prevent the theft from becoming public and causing panic among the people, as well as to punish anyone who dared to fall in love with a vampire from the Shadow lineage. Determined to uncover the truth, the three of them focused on finding clues, and the key to solving the mystery seemed to lie in the book at Niku's house. Alisa's plan was to lure Niku away from the group, allowing Lars and Ivy to secretly steal the book. Inside the book, they discovered the tragic history of Dracula. It revealed that during a war, someone deceived Elizabeth into believing her husband had died in battle. Heartbroken, she chose to end her life. When Dracula returned victorious and found his wife dead, he was devastated. As he mourned her, a demonic entity emerged. Dracula, desperate to hold on to her, exchanged his soul for immortality. However, Elizabeth could not bear her transformation into a monster and refused to live on. When Dracula wept over Elizabeth's body, their blood and tears mixed, creating 13 red gemstones. The knot in the vision Alisa had experienced was not ordinary. If Dracula untied it, it would open the gates of hell, allowing Elizabeth to be resurrected. However, if a vampire with a human soul untied it, it would spell the end for all vampires. Alisa realized that the spark in her hand was the humanity that had escaped from Dracula's being, allowing her to sense his presence. Meanwhile, Tonka, aiming to acquire the red gemstone, noticed Malcolm, who was in a frustrated mood. With ease, Tonka mesmerized him, and under his influence, Malcolm helped Tonka hide in the coat of Alisa's younger brother. At the same time, Dracula arrived at a grave where the Belov family had buried the red gemstone. This gemstone was key to allowing him to walk freely in sunlight, and the Belov family had used a cluster of light to protect it. Dracula waited patiently for the right moment when the light would dim, and once it did, he swiftly jumped down to retrieve the gemstone, ordering his slaves to block the light outside. Alisa observed everything from a distance, her thoughts racing. Lars, sensing her distraction, interrupted her and pointed out that someone was approaching. As predicted, the headmaster soon arrived, urging Alisa to come and see her adoptive father for the last time. The adoptive father ascended to the deck, witnessed by everyone. Unexpectedly, Alisa's younger brother, Tamo, rushed to embrace the Countess, as it turned out that the bat hidden in Tamo's sleeve caused the disturbance. Tamo yanked the red ruby stone away, and the Countess immediately realized and quickly woke Tamo up. As the two of them struggled, the red ruby stone fell to the ground. Tonka seized the opportunity, flew out of Tamo's sleeve, and transformed into human form to pick up the red ruby stone. The Countess rushed to snatch it back, but no one paid attention to Alisa's adoptive father, who was still on the deck. Seeing the sun about to rise, Lars had an idea. He used his telepathic ability to convey to Alisa that now she and Dracula were one. Whatever powers he had, she would also have. For example, he had the ability to resist sunlight. Upon hearing this, Alisa quickly ran up to the deck, pushed her adoptive father down to the lower deck. Her body was under the sunlight, yet she was not harmed. This was Alisa's first time encountering sunlight. She was immersed in its warmth when below deck, Tonka bit the Countess, injuring her, and stole the red ruby stone. The wound on the Countess's hand perfectly matched the evidence left behind. This time, Alisa's adoptive father was exonerated. Everyone gathered to bid farewell to the unfortunate Rafaela. Alisa's adoptive father personally cremated the daughter he loved, while Tonka, having stolen the red ruby stone, flew to a cave and transformed into human form to report back to Dracula about what had happened. To his surprise, Dracula was astonished to hear that Alisa could appear under the sunlight. He ordered Tonka to continue stealing the red ruby stones while also keeping an eye on Alisa. Soon, Alisa entered an illusion again. She saw Dracula acquire the red ruby stone, using it to communicate with the soul of Elizabeth. After Alisa returned to reality, she immediately woke up Luciano and asked him what powers the red ruby stone of the Countess possessed. Luciano's parents had 2 red ruby stones. The red ruby stone that was stolen yesterday belonged to a Rufar. Using it allows one to communicate with the dead. Alisa realized that perhaps she could also speak with her mother, so she asked Luciano how to use the red ruby stone. However, when Alisa tried it for the first time, it didn't work. As she was was feeling disappointed and walking down to the lower deck, her father's spirit appeared. Through this conversation, Alisa learned that her biological father was human, which explained why she had a heart. However, they couldn't talk for long, as the effect of the red ruby stone had its limits. Despite this, Alisa was overjoyed and hurried to share the news with Ivy. Not long after, Lars entered the dining hall. He pretended not to see Malcolm and enthusiastically greeted Alisa, ignoring Malcolm's disappointment. The three of them went down to the basement to confirm Alisa's current abilities. No fear of sunlight, the ability to swim, to communicate with the dead, and to control shadows. At this moment, her foster father called Alisa to go with him. He asked her why she wasn't afraid of sunlight and warned her not to let her powers cloud her judgment. Meanwhile, Tonka had completely taken control of Malcolm, trying to lure him into drinking human blood. Soon after, the next class began. This was a lesson on how to read other people's thoughts. The lesson was taught by Lars's two older sisters. The Countess wanted to probe Alisa's secrets, so she pressured her to accept having her thoughts read. All of Alisa's thoughts were publicly revealed to the class, including her sympathy for Ivy, her admiration for Lars, and her unforgettable feelings for the human boy Niku, which were mocked by everyone. Alisa felt humiliated and overwhelmed with emotion. Tears began to fall. Everyone was shocked by this, and Alisa, unable to contain herself any longer, used her powers to knock one of Lars's sisters down. She even used her strength from a distance to choke the Countess. It seemed that Alisa had been controlled by Dracula's energy within her. Fortunately, Tammo managed to wake her up in time. Heartbroken, Alisa ran out of the classroom and into a secluded area in the town, wanting to summon her mother for a conversation, but her mother didn't just appear. Alisa jumped into the water, yet it still didn't calm her down. She locked herself in a cell. Meanwhile, Ivy appeared very tense as she held a pair of scissors and went to meet Seymour. Just as she was about to say something important, upon seeing Alisa, she hesitated and kept silent. What secret was Ivy hiding? Elsewhere, Dracula was facing trouble. A one-eyed man named Abraham, carrying a gun with silver bullets, came to confront Dracula. Abraham was also wearing a pink gemstone ring. Dracula ignored Abraham's warnings and dropped the stones he had collected into a grave. Abraham bound Dracula's hands and revealed that he possessed a pink gemstone capable of hiding the user from the Caminata family in Switzerland. He had always been secretly searching for Dracula, wanting to borrow Dracula's powers to find more pink gemstones. On the other hand, Alisa was forced to reveal the truth, but when her foster father subtly reminded her, she still kept the secret about the spark. Alisa said that she could no longer sense any supernatural abilities, and she was certain that something had happened to Dracula. After speaking, she suddenly began to feel excruciating pain because Abraham was torturing Dracula. He had been pushed into a room filled with holy crosses. Unable to bear it, Alisa immediately fainted, and even Lars couldn't read her thoughts. Now there was only one extremely dangerous method left. Lars and his two sisters would attempt to read Alisa's thoughts together. However, this method was strictly forbidden. Lars had only seen his father use it once, and if they failed, they would become lost in Alisa's mind. The headmaster ordered everyone without proper authority to leave, and Lars did not hesitate to enter Alisa's thoughts. It was like a vast labyrinth, and Lars saw Alisa passing by. He quickly chased after her, but he lost track of her. Suddenly, he noticed coins scattered on the ground, with Niku sitting high up, tossing them down. Lars couldn't help but feel angry when he saw Niku, but in the blink of an eye, Niku disappeared. Alisa's voice echoed from the darkness, constantly calling for Lars's help. Lars held a flame and followed the sound, only to see Alisa's childhood memories. Her mother held her hand, telling her that she too had a spark within her. But right after that, they realized they were being eavesdropped on, so they immediately vanished. Lars went deeper and saw himself. To his surprise, he was kissing Ivy. Alisa's consciousness suddenly asked, "Don't you like me? Why are you kissing someone else?" At that moment, Alisa's consciousness began to waver, and Lars was knocked to the ground by a shaking force. When everything returned to normal, he found a coffin. After the coffin, there was a room full of holy crosses, and Dracula was tied to a chair. Lars quickly regained his composure and realized the source of the problem. Only by saving Dracula could Alisa escape danger. At that moment, Tonka sneaked into the room, transforming into a human form to silently monitor and report back to Dracula. However, Dracula was too consumed with pain to care about this. Sitting in the chair, he twisted his body in agony, gritting his teeth and refusing to reveal where the other red gems were. Suddenly, Dracula sensed a surge of energy. It turned out that Lars had placed the Countess's red gemstone around Alisa's neck. Using the power of the gemstone, Dracula immediately freed himself from the ropes. When Abraham returned, he found that Dracula had vanished from the chair. Dracula quickly grabbed Abraham by the throat and took the invisibility red gemstone from him, successfully escaping the room full of holy crosses. Meanwhile, Alisa also woke up. She thanked Lars's family and returned returned the red gemstone to the Countess. The headmaster told everyone to go to bed early and patiently wait for the next lesson. However, Malcolm, who was in charge of teaching the next class, seemed to be lost in thought. Tonka, observing from a distance, revealed a sly smile. Alisa, unable to sense the energy she had felt before, guessed that Dracula didn't have the red gemstones with him. Instead, she discovered a new ability, invisibility. She used this power to find Lars and thank him for his help earlier. As Alisa embraced Lars, he could feel her heartbeat. Before he could calm himself, she kissed him on the lips. After the kiss, Alisa ran off. Lars was about to return to his coffin to sleep when he suddenly noticed Malcolm's coffin was still open. Lars went outside to look for Malcolm and found him sitting, talking to a rat. Without thinking much, Lars told Malcolm to stay away from the rat to avoid being bitten. As Lars left, Tonka appeared and offered Malcolm human blood. At the same time, Alisa couldn't sleep. She intended to find Ivy, but instead found her cutting her hair. Vampire hair once cut would never grow back. Ivy reluctantly confessed that she was a shadow vampire and that Seymour, the wolf, was the true heir. Seymour's family had been wiped out in the war, and he had transformed Ivy from a normal human into a shadow vampire to keep him company. The two had depended on each other, seeking the red gemstones of Seymour's family. At that moment, the light in Alisa's hand reappeared. Since the two of them were holding hands, they were both pulled into an illusion. They saw Dracula throwing red gemstones into a grave. Perhaps Dracula didn't want Alisa to grow stronger, so he had temporarily hidden the gemstones. Eventually, the two returned to reality. Alisa realized she had to open the knot in the cave before Dracula did, but she didn't know where the knot was. The person who knew the most about these matters was her foster father. Alisa immediately went to find her foster father. With no other choice, he took her to a secluded place and pulled out a diary written in code. This was the diary her mother had left behind, and it seemed the answer Alisa was searching for might lie within. As she flipped through the now yellowed pages, the first page contained a warning her mother had left. The warning advised her daughter not to trust the clan leader, particularly the Drakas family, and specifically Lars's father. The diary also contained notes about the spark and the knot in the rope. Her mother couldn't give clear instructions on how to decode the message, but believed that Alisa would understand. It was another puzzle. Alisa struggled to figure it out, flipping through the diary in frustration. Unable to solve it, she angrily threw the diary to the ground and left. Ivy, knowing Alisa needed some time alone to calm down, picked up the diary without chasing after her. Meanwhile, the headmaster went to meet the leaders of the families. The headmaster reminded everyone that Dracula had awakened, and Alisa had seen him in her mind. Danger was drawing closer. Alisa went up to the town to clear her head, but unexpectedly encountered Niku. He had been standing by the well, praying, waiting for her. Niku had originally planned to take Alisa for a walk, but Calvina suddenly appeared. It turned out that Calvina wanted her son to join the Red Mask Society. Niku hadn't intended to join, but Alisa expressed her desire to go, so the three of them went to the Red Mask headquarters. The members of the Red Mask Society were aware that there were vampires in the area, and they planned to launch an attack to destroy them. Alisa blended into the crowd, but a feeling of unease rose within her. At the same time, Malcolm's lesson began. The Virad family's special ability was to control natural phenomena. Malcolm conjured thunder and rain, then raised his hand to cast a bolt of lightning toward Lars. The classroom descended into chaos, and Countess's wife did her best to calm the students. However, a rat was sneaking into the classroom unnoticed. While everyone was focused on Malcolm, Tonka suddenly appeared and captured the Countess. Malcolm had completely lost control, relentlessly attacking Lars. His anger and the presence of human blood had enhanced his powers. Ivy attempted to awaken Malcolm's mind, but Tonka was constantly by his side, saying provocative words. Under Tonka's influence, Malcolm was forced to obey and grabbed Ivy. Tonka also seized the Countess, and they headed to the deck, locking Lars and the others behind a door. At that moment, Alisa arrived just in time and demanded that Tonka and Malcolm release the prisoners. Lars pushed against the door, which Malcolm had locked, and used his telepathy to communicate with Alisa. He instructed her to divert Tonka's attention. Seeing that the sun was about to rise, Malcolm controlled the clouds to block the sunlight. In the confusion, Alisa admitted that she possessed the spark and urged Tonka to release the Countess. She offered to take the Countess's place as a hostage. However, as soon as the Countess heard about the spark, she immediately realized that Alisa must not fall into Dracula's hands. The Countess had once promised Alisa's mother that she would protect the spark at all costs. She told Lars to take Alisa away, and then seize the human blood from Tonka's hand, throwing it into the sea. Seeing this, Malcolm suddenly jumped into the water. The moment he left the deck, the sunlight pierced through the clouds. Tonka retreated into the shadows, but the Countess collapsed weakly as soon as she was exposed to the sunlight. Alisa, protected by the Belov family's ruby, stood in the sunlight, witnessing avenging the Countess's death. Angrily, Alisa rushed to Tonka, dragging him into the sunlight. Tonka was burned to ashes, and the newly seized ruby in the ring Tonka had swallowed fell to the ground. Alisa picked up the ruby and placed it around Luciano's neck, comforting him as he mourned. A sorrowful atmosphere enveloped the ship. Later, they retrieved Malcolm from the sea. Vampires couldn't swim, and they locked him in a cell. By law, he was to be exposed to sunlight as punishment. Eventually, Ivy succeeded in obtaining the Belov family's ruby. She transformed the heir Seymour back into his human form. At this moment, Lars called Alisa, holding on to the words Alisa's mother had once said. Lars hoped that Alisa could believe he was different from others in the Dracus family. Alisa, grasping Lars's hand, decided to trust him. Aside from that, Lars had something else he needed to say. Earlier, out of concern for Alisa, he had used his ability to read minds. He learned that the Red Mask group was preparing to attack. Meanwhile, one of Calvina's subordinates reported what they had seen. It appeared that a vampire civil war was unfolding on the ship, and 2 vampires had turned to ash. Amid the chaos, a human girl had suddenly appeared, someone who could stand under the sunlight. Calvina immediately thought of Alisa, the mysterious girl who often appeared and then disappeared. Back on the vampire ship, the group went to visit Malcolm. Alisa agreed to give him a chance, and in return, Malcolm was forced to teach everyone how to control the weather. The heirs quickly focused on learning to cooperate in order to deal with the Red Mask group. They had just started to make progress when the headmaster returned. Lars reminded everyone to keep Malcolm's betrayal a secret and not to mention the Red Mask group to avoid sparking a localized war with humans. Luciano and Alisa were tasked with informing the headmaster of the death of his wife. Luciano was heartbroken over the loss of his mother, and the headmaster was devastated by the death of his wife. Meanwhile, Calvina was secretly observing the situation. Upon seeing Alisa, she was certain her suspicions were correct. Suddenly, Dracula appeared behind her, and his voice whispered, saying that it seemed he wasn't the only one paying attention to Alisa. Dracula's green eyes gleamed. When Calvina returned home, she kept the events of the day to herself, not telling anyone, including her son, about Alisa's true identity. However, Alisa took the initiative to visit them. She approached Niku with a proposal to attend another Red Mask meeting. The goal was to clarify the enemy's plans, and Lars quietly followed Alisa to coordinate with her. Meanwhile, the heirs were in class, and today it was Seymour's turn to teach. His ability was shape-shifting, allowing him to transform into various animals. As everyone focused on their lessons, Alisa's adoptive father rushed into the classroom in panic, announcing that all the clan leaders had returned. Ivy's expression immediately changed, and she reminded everyone not to forget their promise to Alisa. They should not reveal that the Red Mask group was preparing to attack. After returning home, Lars's father immediately went to see the headmaster. Since the headmaster's wife passed away, he had been deeply saddened, spending his days sitting in a chair, muttering his wife's last words, to be strong and brave. Lars's father quickly gathered the heirs and asked what had happened and where Lars was. Magnus then used his ability to read minds to probe all the heirs who had learned to resist this technique. He couldn't harm the children, and he was unable to extract any useful information. Meanwhile, Alisa arrived at the base, where everyone was training diligently. She used her ability to read minds to communicate with Lars, telling him to go inside and find some useful information. Lars entered the room and approached the battle map, which displayed the Red Mask group's plans. At that moment, 2 men entered the room, and Lars quickly hid in a corner. The 2 men complained about Calvina arriving late at a crucial moment, but the truth was that Calvina was with Dracula along with a special person, Umberto. It turned out that Umberto was also one of Dracula's subordinates. Umberto informed Dracula that all the clan leaders and the red gemstones were on the ship. Suddenly, the spark within Alisa flared up, and her consciousness reached Dracula's location. He was proudly boasting to Calvina, saying he had successfully lured the Red Mask group members. Alisa realized that Calvina was being controlled. She quickly returned to the present, grabbing Niku's hand and pulling him into an illusion. Niku, seeing his mother under Dracula's influence, was about to scream, but in an instant he returned to reality. It was then that Niku learned Alisa's true identity. The Red Masked group was preparing to attack, and Alisa urgently asked Niku for help. She stressed that Calvina had to be stopped, but she would handle the vampire side of things. After speaking, Alisa and Lars quickly left to return to the ship. As they arrived, the clan leaders immediately questioned them. Alisa explained that Dracula was there and had taken control of the Red Mask group's leader, with the goal of stealing all the red gemstones. She mentioned having a plan, but noted that the clan leaders didn't want to involve the children. Fortunately, the principal intervened, supporting Alisa and explaining that he trusted these brave children and believed in Alisa's plan. Meanwhile, Calvina had transformed into a shadow vampire. She pushed Niku away as he tried to stop her and led the Red Mask group onto the ship. ship. However, once they were aboard, they found the ship empty, and there was no trace of the vampires anywhere. The Red Mask group gathered on the deck, confused by the situation. Suddenly, Lars's voice echoed, and the vampire students appeared atop the mast, leaping down to surround the Red Mask group. The clan leaders were hiding at the rear of the ship, swinging on ropes. The members of Red Mask tried to threaten them with crosses, but the heirs no longer feared the crosses. Alisa's younger brother raised his hand, calling down lightning. They had mastered the powers of other clans, and their strength far exceeded expectations. Calvina could only show her fangs in frustration. Seeing their leader was also a vampire, the Red Mask members began jumping into the sea to escape. The heirs quickly captured Calvina, but to their surprise, one Red Mask member remained behind. He walked forward and removed his mask, revealing himself as Niku. He didn't understand why his mother had become a vampire and felt betrayed by Alisa. Disappointed, Niku left the ship. The heirs celebrated, knowing that the Red Mask group had finally retreated. The group successfully rescued the clan leaders and set sail, leaving Italy behind. Dracula, silently watching the ship, muttered that this was just the beginning. Lars approached Alisa, and they spoke from the heart, exchanging their feelings. The two stood together on the ship's deck and shared a kiss, confident that no matter what dangers the future held, they would face them together. Meanwhile, their ship was heading toward England, where they would meet the Virad vampire clan to continue learning about the vampire world. On the other side, Niku lay despondently by the roadside. The mother he once loved had turned into a vampire, and the girl he loved was also a vampire. Niku felt abandoned, as though the world had turned its back on him, losing all hope for the future. Meanwhile, Calvina was locked away in the vampire ship's dungeon, awaiting her judgment under the sun's rays. Alisa, though, couldn't bring herself to let Calvina face such a fate, especially since Calvina was Niku's mother. At that moment, the power of the spark manifested again. Through the blinding light, Alisa saw Dracula approaching Niku. He used the promise of saving Calvina to try and persuade Niku to join him. However, Calvina had already turned into a shadow vampire, and even if she were rescued, she would only be a puppet. Niku refused to ally with the vampires. Unexpectedly, Dracula claimed that he could return Calvina to her original state. Suddenly, Dracula spoke directly to Alisa, revealing that he knew she was there and that he would come for his ruby stones. Alisa, undeterred by Dracula's threat, rushed to ask the clan leaders if there was a way to turn a shadow vampire back into a human. The leaders, realizing they couldn't hide the truth any longer, reluctantly told her about the ritual performed by grandmasters that could free the shadow and restore the puppet to their true self. Alisa then asked why they hadn't released them all. The clan leaders couldn't help but laugh at her question, realizing that the answer was far more complicated than she imagined. Of course, the clan leaders didn't release the shadow vampires because they needed slaves to serve them. If they freed all the shadows, who would serve the vampires? Alisa was furious at their shamelessness, and in her anger, accidentally let slip that her close friend, Ivy, was also a shadow vampire. This led to Ivy being sent to the back to work, as only the clan leaders and their heirs were provided with proper accommodations. In a matter of moments, Ivy reverted back to being a slave. She began deliberately distancing herself from Alisa, making her feel the harshness of the situation. Meanwhile, the clan leaders had set a date for Calvina's punishment. They planned to bring her to the deck the following day and expose her to the sun. After learning this, Alisa couldn't hold back her resentment towards Lars, as his father had been the one to make this decision. Alisa was determined not to let Calvina burn under the sun, so she secretly unlocked the cage and freed Calvina. However, Calvina showed no gratitude and instead took the opportunity to injure Magnus, intending to steal the ruby stones for her master Dracula. Fortunately, Alisa managed to catch Calvina in time and lock her back into the coffin. However, Magnus had already been wounded by a silver arrow, and he couldn't hold on much longer. Feeling ashamed and regretful, Alisa ran to the deck and cried, ripping up her mother's journal in despair. She thought she wasn't worthy of being chosen by the spark. However, as the torn pages scattered across the ground, they pieced together into a map. By accident, Alisa unlocked a clue left by her mother, realizing that with this map, she could finally untie the knot in her illusion and defeat Dracula. Meanwhile, Niku made a firm decision. As long as he could save his mother, he would cooperate with Dracula, no matter the cost. However, before that, Dracula wanted to test Niku. If he could replace his mother and become the leader of the Red Mask, Dracula promised to lift Calvina's vampire shadow curse. On the other hand, the angered by Alisa's reckless release of the prisoner, had locked her up in the dungeon to reflect on her actions. Moreover, Alisa's cell was right next to Calvina's. At this moment, Calvina had regained her senses and forgotten everything that had just happened, including that she had a son. All the vampire shadows were like this. They couldn't retain their memories or autonomy. Calvina desperately pleaded with Alisa to tell her more about her son. Alisa praised Niku, with without holding back any affection she had for him. Meanwhile, Niku was facing Red Mask alone, and the best way to earn their respect was to challenge them head-on. Niku fought and defeated the leader, causing trouble, earning the respect of Red Mask. Dracula, observing from the side, was pleased and left. At the same time, Lars, determined to save his father, changed the ship's course and headed back to his homeland in Norway. He sought the help of an old woman in Tromps to save his father. However, the old woman insisted that she could only help if she met Alisa. The old woman in Tromps explained that the silver left in Magnus's body had locked his heart, preventing it from beating. The only way to unlock his heart was for Alisa to enter Magnus's consciousness and awaken it. Alisa immediately agreed, and she entered Magnus's mind. However, there she found the vampire clan leaders planning to imprison her mother. Alisa, determined, continued forward with a torch in hand until she finally caught up with Magnus. There, she saw him taking the Grimmer family's gemstone, a red jewel that could protect vampires from sunlight. Magnus raised the gem high and shouted that all vampires wishing to leave the battlefield must kneel before the Dracus family. Just then, Magnus's brother, Ragnar, appeared, telling Magnus that their father wouldn't last much longer. Magnus rushed to his father's side, and knowing that his time was short, their father removed the Dracus family's red gem and handed it to Magnus. Magnus, who had been deeply moved by his father's last words, found himself shocked when his father declared that Ragnar was unfit to lead the family because there was darkness in his soul. Just as the family dynamic unfolded before Magnus's eyes, Alisa was suddenly swept into a vision of the past. The moment Lars was born, she was touched by the warmth of the scene before her, but unexpectedly, the spark in her hand began to glow brightly. Magnus, realizing something was amiss, detected Alisa's presence and questioned why she was there. Alisa explained that she had come to free him. Magnus, still confused, believed that he was with his family and that this place was his rightful home. Alisa quickly explained that his mind was being controlled by silver threads and that everything he was experiencing was an illusion. She urged him to return to the real world where his son Lars was waiting for him. Hearing this, Magnus's mind began to clear. As he regained his senses, he was horrified to see the face of his wife, which had previously been soft and loving, now distorted and monstrous. He hesitated, reaching out to take Alisa's hand. A second later, they both snapped back to reality, but Magnus needed time to recover from the trance. The next day, Lars made arrangements to have his father, Magnus, taken to the Emerald Forest for treatment. During this time, he would temporarily assume leadership of the family. Ragnar, always present by Lars's side, feigned concern, showing an outward display of support. However, Alisa couldn't forget the warning her grandfather had given her that Ragnar harbored darkness in his soul. She had intended to speak with Lars about this, but before she could, Ragnar called him away for a meeting. With no other choice, Alisa shifted her focus. She needed to investigate her mother's whereabouts. Following the clues in the illusion, she deduced that her mother might be imprisoned in the Eternal Light prison. Lars's eldest sister confirmed that the prison was located to the north of the forest. She was willing to take Alisa there, and Ivy accompanied them as well. At this moment, the three of them were unaware that a mysterious one-eyed man, Abraham, was trailing behind them. Meanwhile, Lars was not swayed by Ragnar's manipulation. On the contrary, he kicked him out of the meeting room. The reason was simple. This was a meeting of the clan leaders, and Ragnar had no right to participate. Ragnar left in a rage, and Lars's second sister, fearing Ragnar might have ulterior motives, gathered all her courage to follow him. As a result, she accidentally discovered Ragnar secretly contacting Dracula. On the other hand, in the meeting with the clan leaders, the discussion about how to deal with Alisa and Calvina became increasingly heated. Naturally, Lars wanted to protect Alisa, but he could not go against the vampire laws. So, he had no choice but to delay the decision. Lars suggested imprisoning the two of them in the Eternal Light prison for the time being. Unexpectedly, the faces of the clan leaders suddenly changed, and they quickly said that such an action must not be taken because there was a special prisoner in the Eternal Light prison. Lars felt confused, as the prison had been abandoned for centuries. Who could possibly be imprisoned there? The clan leaders had no choice but to reveal the truth. The person imprisoned there was Elena, Alisa's mother. Upon hearing this, Lars immediately ran outside, eager to share the good news with Alisa. However, he was informed by Alisa's adoptive father that Alisa had already gone into the forest with Ivy and his eldest sister. Lars rushed in the direction they had gone. Meanwhile, Alisa's group had arrived at the entrance of the Eternal Light prison. The three of them entered cautiously. As soon as Alisa looked inside, she saw her mother. Although they were separated by a shield of light, Alisa, linked to the Grimoire family's ruby, shared her power with Lars, allowing them both to resist the light. Alisa rushed into her mother's arms and asked, "Why did they imprison you?" Alina explained that the vampires wanted to protect their clan. The clan leaders feared that if Alina succeeded in untying the knot, all vampires would turn back into humans, so they imprisoned her and lied to everyone, claiming that she had died. However, if Dracula found the knot before them, everyone in the world would become his shadow. Alisa, being the chosen one with the spark, had to make a difficult decision. While the two mother and daughter were talking, Lars arrived and opened the light shield. After centuries, Elena was finally freed. At the same time, Lars's younger sister backed to the base to inform everyone that Ragnar had betrayed the clan. Unfortunately, it was too late. Ragnar had captured the leader of the Virad clan and stolen her ruby. Using the power of the ruby, Ragnar summoned the vampire's natural enemy, an entire pack of wolves. Ragnar then threatened the clan leaders to hand over their rubies. Since the young heirs were being held hostage by Ragnar, Alisa's grandmother was the first to give up her ruby, and the other clan leaders followed suit. At the same time, Abraham stormed into the prison, shouting that they had arrived and urging everyone to escape. Lars, preparing to leave, predicted through his ruby that Ragnar was approaching. Upon hearing this, Alina quickly hid her daughter, then retreated into the light shield, pretending that Alisa was never there. With Ragnar holding many rubies, he easily captured Lars, and the other clan leaders were also imprisoned. Alisa, wanting to rush out to save Lars, found that the spark in her palm began to glow. She saw the demon order Elizabeth to inform Dracula that help was on the way. Alisa assumed that the help referred to Ragnar, bringing the rubies he had obtained to Dracula. In this dangerous situation, Alisa had no choice but to stop Ragnar. Ivy and Lars's older sister continued to follow and assist her. First, they returned to the base to distract the pack of wolves surrounding everyone, trying to save them before sunrise. Alisa, the only one who wasn't afraid of sunlight, was chosen as the bait. Ivy and Lars's older sister helped everyone escape into the houses. Soon, the sun began to rise, and Alisa ran away from the wolves. As the wolves were about to pounce on her, Lars's older sister quickly rushed out and pulled Alisa into the house. Additionally, there was a tunnel between the wooden houses, which allowed Lars's sister to reach Alisa in time. Alisa went down the tunnel to the Heirs' house, where she met her younger brother. She emotionally told Tammo that their mother was still alive. Meanwhile, Ragnar was arguing with Lars, blaming his father for not allowing him to succeed as clan leader. He resented Magnus for handing over the clan's leadership to Lars after the incident. He hated not being able to kill Lars immediately, but for now, Lars was still useful. Ragnar said he had prepared a ship on the east side, and tonight, Lars would have to board the ship and leave. If not, he would kill Alisa's younger brother and several other heirs. With no other choice, Lars had no option but to agree. Ragnar stated that they would set off to Russia after sunset. Abraham, hiding in the corner, overheard everything. Soon, he approached Alisa and proposed an alliance. However, Alisa wasn't fond of Abraham, as he was a notorious vampire hunter. For years, he had been relentlessly killing her kind. To convince Alisa, Abraham admitted that he knew where Ragnar intended to take Lars and the gemstone. Hearing this, Alisa reluctantly agreed to cooperate. On the way, Abraham told her that a part of Dracula's gemstone was buried in Beloved's tomb, a place where ordinary vampires couldn't enter. So, Abraham needed Alisa's help, as he was a vampire too. Meanwhile, Ivy, searching for Alisa, unintentionally encountered the old woman from Tromps. The old woman spoke many cryptic words that didn't seem to make sense, and then touched Ivy's forehead. On the other side, Dracula told Niku that he would be going to Russia with him to retrieve the gemstone. The reason Dracula chose Niku was simple. Since Alisa liked him, he would undoubtedly prove useful. Dracula ordered his subordinates to create a silver chest and entrusted Niku with guarding it, as the chest would likely be used to contain the gemstone. Back with Alisa, she took Abraham back to the ship, intending to sail to Russia to rescue Lars. However, Alina disagreed with her daughter's plan, believing that they should first search for the knot. Hearing this, Alisa felt deeply disappointed. Alina, in turn, asked Ivy to convey to Alisa that the final drawing related to the knot was hidden at the Vamalia residence. As night fell, several brave heirs made the decision to follow Alisa and rescue Lars. However, Ivy suddenly stopped Alisa's adoptive father, intending to ask where Alisa's journal was. Her words expressed dissatisfaction with the rescue mission, believing that Alisa should focus on finding the knot rather than wasting time on Lars. Meanwhile, Alisa's younger brother was eavesdropping on their conversation. Realizing how precious time was, Alisa quickly went to say goodbye to her mother. Unexpectedly, a missile appeared, pulling Alisa into an illusion created by Dracula. Alisa found herself sitting in a carriage, with Niku as the driver. Sadly, Niku couldn't see Alisa in the illusion. With a heavy heart, Alisa returned to the ship. Her adoptive father stood on the shore, watching the ship depart, but he suddenly noticed that Tammo was missing. It turned out that Tammo, unable to ease his worry about Alisa, had secretly boarded the ship with his best friend. The two of them saw Ivy find the journal and was completing the map. Just then, a loud noise echoed from the ship's deck. Abraham noticed a massive dark cloud and powerful lightning ahead. The gemstone that could create this storm was in Ragnar's possession, which meant that he and Lars were not far off. Ragnar turned his back on Alisa's ship, confident that they wouldn't survive the storm. Giant waves rose from the sea, and rain mixed with seawater crashed violently against the ship. Ivy and Lars's older sister were still studying the journal, but they hit their first obstacle. They couldn't decode the date on a map. At that moment, Tamo appeared and said he knew how to solve it. The date corresponded to Alina's birthday. Hearing this, Ivy immediately realized that this meant Alisa was the last person with the spark, the only one who could find the knot. The knot was truly magical. If Alisa untied it, all vampires in the world would become human, but if Dracula were to undo it, all humans would turn into shadow vampires. Ivy shared her theory with Alisa, but before Alisa could make a decision, her team called for her. Dawn was approaching, and she had to go outside to steer the ship in place of Abraham. The storm on the sea grew more intense, and soon, Alisa was thrown off balance by the waves. The seawater flooded into the ship through the gaps, and the crew could only try to block it with their hands. Ivy noticed the journal pages were soaked, and she became deeply concerned. Her face suddenly turned pale. The power left in Ivy by the old woman began to activate. The massive waves on the sea suddenly stopped. Then vines with purple-tipped green leaves grew to seal the ship's holes. Lars's older sister found this strange and secretly plucked a leaf, hiding it away. On the other side, in Russia, Niku followed Dracula's instructions to move the ruby jewels from the grave into the silver chest. To prevent Niku from betraying him, Dracula kept the key to the chest for himself. Meanwhile, Ragnar and Lars successfully arrived in Russia. Lars questioned Ragnar about why they had to come here, and Ragnar replied that tonight he would meet his ancestors. Lars didn't understand the meaning of this, but the answer was soon revealed. Through the spark, Alisa saw the developments in Russia. Indeed, Ragnar had gone to meet Dracula. Ragnar intended to offer his collection of ruby jewels to Dracula in exchange for what he desired. However, Dracula wasn't interested in wasting time with Ragnar. He would not keep his promise to Ragnar. All Dracula wanted was the ruby jewels. He threw Ragnar into the sunlight, watching him turn to ash. Then, Dracula ordered Niku to collect Ragnar's ruby jewels and place them into the silver chest. Afterward, Dracula threatened Lars, insisting that he must cooperate with him. At this point, the two young men Alisa cared about the most were both in Dracula's hands. She could only watch as everything unfolded, but felt powerless to stop it. Alisa's consciousness returned to her body, and although the storm had finally passed, her mood was complicated. Dracula had obtained all the ruby jewels, leaving her with little hope. Ivy, noticing Alisa's distress, reminded her that they needed to go to the Vamalia family to get the final piece. Without it, even if they rescued Lars and Niku, it wouldn't make a difference. Alisa's mind was consumed with thoughts of love, and she wanted to argue, but both Niku's mother and Lars's elder sister agreed with Ivy's perspective. The most important task now was to find the final piece and the knot before Dracula did. With no other choice, Alisa reluctantly gave up on rescuing Niku and Lars for the moment, shifting her focus to the Vamalia family. After a long and exhausting day, everyone planned to rest and regain their strength. However, to Alisa's surprise, Tamo suddenly pulled her aside and reminded her that Abraham's sister still had a heartbeat. He might be half human, half vampire. On the other side, Lars accidentally discovered that although Dracula had obtained all the ruby jewels, he still didn't know the location of the knot. In the middle of the night on the ship, the changes in Ivy's body became more and more apparent. She had no idea what the old woman had done to her. At that moment, Ivy heard the old woman's voice. She told her to listen to the sounds of all things. Ivy calmed down and soon heard the sound of a paintbrush. Cautiously, she followed the noise and discovered Abraham was drawing the map again. Ivy didn't trust him, so she immediately went to tell Alisa. Upon hearing the news, Alisa rushed to confront Abraham. To her surprise, he explained that the previous water leak on the ship had nearly ruined the journal pages, so he thought it would be safer to keep a copy of the map. After saying this, he handed Alisa the copy of the map he had made. To prove that he didn't have any ulterior motives, Abraham also admitted to Alisa that he had a heartbeat. It turned out that Abraham was the child of both a vampire and a human. His vampire father had been ruthless, causing his mother to suffer greatly throughout her life. That's why Abraham became a vampire hunter. However, he couldn't possibly kill all the vampires in the world on his own. The only way to end the vampire empire was by helping Alisa unravel the knot. At that moment, they saw the continent on the other side of the shore. They had finally reached their destination. Alisa, Calvina, and Ivy went to find the map, while the others stayed behind to guard the ship. Before leaving, Alisa instructed Tamo to watch over Abraham. Once everything was arranged, the three of them made their way to the harbor and entered the city. They quickly arrived at the Vamalia family estate, where a few members of the Red Mask group were waiting outside. outside. The three of them disguised themselves as members of the group, overhearing the password to pass through the gate and successfully infiltrating the building. It turned out that Red Mask was gathered inside for a meeting. They were planning how to eliminate all vampires when the three of them snuck past the excited group and headed upstairs to find the final piece. Unexpectedly, the spark in Alisa's hand began to glow, and she guessed that the final piece must be nearby. Ivy picked up a family photo on the table, which included Tammo and a young Alisa. Suddenly, Ivy remembered a hint from Alina. Could the final piece be hidden behind the photo? She immediately removed the picture and, to her surprise, found the final piece behind it. In their excitement, they accidentally made a noise, attracting the attention of the Red Mask group outside. At the crucial moment, a member of Red Mask suddenly removed their mask. To their shock, it was Alisa's adoptive father. Alisa rushed to embrace him, but just then, the spark in the broken shards of a mirror glowed, revealing Dracula's face. He thanked them for guiding him to the final piece. Before anyone could fully understand the situation, the Red Mask group downstairs discovered their presence. In a critical moment, Calvina came up with a plan. She pretended to capture Alisa and her group. The Red Mask members recognized Calvina as the leader of the main branch and immediately halted their attack. Calvina asked if they had a cell, claiming she wanted to interrogate the three vampires to find out about their accomplices. However, the leader of the Red Mask group wasn't a fool. He sensed something was wrong, so he decided to keep the final piece for himself. To gain their trust, Calvina offered to kill one of the vampires. Knowing Alisa wasn't afraid of the sunlight, she deliberately chose her to take the punishment. One of the Red Mask members escorted Alisa outside. Just as the leader was confused about why Alisa wasn't being burned by the sunlight, Calvina quickly drew a knife and pressed it to his throat. With that, she and Alisa successfully obtained the keys to the prison cell and the final piece. Alisa immediately rescued Ivy and her foster father, and the four of them quickly left the place. Meanwhile, on the ship, the group of companions, seeing that Alisa hadn't returned yet, considered venturing out to search for her. However, Malcolm disagreed with this idea, as Alisa had instructed them not to leave the ship no matter what happened. Unexpectedly, Abraham, who was nearby, volunteered to go outside and meet Alisa. Tammo knew his sister didn't trust Abraham, and just as everyone began to regret letting Abraham go, Alisa's group returned safely. Everyone was curious why Alisa's foster father was here. It turned out that after discovering Tammo had secretly boarded the ship, he became worried and went to Valmalia earlier to wait for them. At first, he believed Alisa would make the right decision and not go to Russia, but instead come to Valmalia to find the final piece. The truth proved that the foster father had not waited in vain. Suddenly, Alisa asked where Abraham was. At that moment, Abraham went to meet the leader of the Red Mask group. Unexpectedly, the two were already familiar with each other. It turned out that Abraham's goal was to use the Bloodstones to dominate the world, to control all vampires, and to reign over all humans. Alisa had fallen into a trap. At that moment, the oil lamp fell to the ground and the flames quickly burned the map. Seeing that the map was completely destroyed, Alisa reached into her pocket, only to find that the copy of the map was also gone. It was certain that Abraham had stolen it. At the same time, Dracula brought Niku and Lars to the border of Transylvania. Lars seized the opportunity to fix the carriage and secretly approached Niku. Lars tried to convince Niku to help him open the silver chest so they could destroy the Bloodstones and prevent Dracula from unlocking the knot. Niku, persuaded by Lars, agreed to wait until Dracula fell asleep. Lars then cut the iron wire holding the key, but suddenly, Dracula woke up and tightly gripped Lars's neck. Although Dracula did not kill Lars, he made it clear that he would not tolerate such an incident happening again. Meanwhile, Alisa, through the spark in her hand, learned that Dracula would arrive in 2 days. They had to prepare for battle. Not only did they need to steal back the copy of the map from Abraham, but they also had to figure out how to steal the Bloodstones. That night, Ivy dreamt of the strange old woman again. When Ivy seemed to be losing control, fortunately, Lars's older sister woke her up. She noticed the pattern on Ivy's legs and realized what had happened to her. Ivy was slowly becoming the next Noaide, a sign that a new prophet was about to be born. Ivy would gain the power of nature and establish a connection with the mother of all things. At that moment, an uninvited guest appeared. Abraham demanded that Alisa help him gather all the Bloodstones, promising to hand over the copy of the map as a reward. However, Alisa, having been deceived once before, wasn't so easily persuaded to cooperate. Meanwhile, Ivy, fearing that Alisa might fall into another trap, used the power of Noaide to eavesdrop on the conversation between the two. Unexpectedly, just as she was listening to half of the conversation, a hand suddenly reached out from the wall and pulled Ivy into an illusion. The old woman said that the knot was inside the cave nearby, and she could take Ivy in to have a look. Ivy explained that she didn't have the spark, so she couldn't enter. The old woman replied that Ivy's best friend did. Alisa could help her. As soon as the old woman finished speaking, the spark in Alisa's hand suddenly lit up, successfully opening the stone door. However, Alisa had no idea what had just happened. Ivy followed the old woman into the cave. The old woman explained that the spark was actually Dracula's humanity. When it combined with the 13 ruby stones, it would form Dracula's heart, which could undo the knot. However, anyone who wanted to untie the knot must pass 5 trials of humanity. Alisa would need Ivy's help to pass the final test. The old woman warned Ivy that the spark's power would gradually run out. If they cannot untie the knot before the eclipse arrives, Dracula will win, and at that point, the power of the spark will also disappear. This is because Ivy is lost in the world of consciousness, leaving her body in a state of coma, which causes great concern for Alisa's group. Unexpectedly, Calvina, who is nearby, suddenly goes insane and loses her rationality in an instant. This is a sign that Dracula is approaching. Only when the distance between Calvina and Dracula is shortened can Dracula control the shadow vampire Calvina. Just at that moment, Ivy suddenly wakes up and tells Alisa that they must complete the mission within 3 days. Otherwise, when the eclipse ends, everything will fail. This also means that Alisa cannot avoid cooperating with Abraham to exchange the ruby for the map. To find Dracula's ruby, Alisa intentionally lets Calvina go, knowing that the shadow vampire will definitely seek out its master. Therefore, they just need to follow her. The group followed Calvina to an abandoned house and, as expected, found Dracula there. Niku ran to his mother, pleading with Dracula to release Calvina from her shadow vampire state. However, Dracula suddenly went back on his word. Seeing this, Alisa decisively revealed herself, shouting for Abraham, who was waiting outside. Abraham arrived with a large group of Red Mask members, and a massive battle was about to unfold. Both sides roared before charging into each other. The battle was devastating for both sides. Abraham managed to shoot Dracula with a silver bullet, but Alisa was accidentally caught in the crossfire. Like Dracula, she fell into a relentless fever. With no other choice, the group brought both of them back to the ship. Amid the chaos, Malcolm was captured by the Red Mask group. During this time, Lars retrieved the ruby and attempted to use it to enter Alisa's consciousness to save her. However, he accidentally discovered that her consciousness had merged with Dracula's. He was unable to separate Alisa's mind from Dracula's, leaving her no choice but to fight through the fever herself. She had no choice but to find her own way out. At this moment, Alisa found herself trapped in Dracula's consciousness, witnessing his past. Dracula once had a happy family until the country was invaded by the Turks. As Count Dracula, he was ordered to lead the army against the enemy. However, during his absence, the enemy's son was captured, and rumors spread among the people that Dracula had been defeated and met a tragic end. Heartbroken by the news, Countess Elizabeth, Dracula's wife, chose to end her own life. When Dracula returned triumphantly, he found only his wife's lifeless body. Devastated by the loss of his beloved, Dracula fell into despair and decided to abandon everything. His humanity transformed into the spark and left his body. Even if he were to endure the flames of hell for eternity, Dracula had no regrets about becoming cruel for the sake of his love. Meanwhile, Tamo, in an attempt to rescue Malcolm and the others, ventured alone to the Red Mask base to negotiate with Abraham. Abraham demanded that Tamo steal the last 3 ruby stones in exchange for Malcolm's release. Abraham demanded not just the 3 ruby stones, but also Tamo's best friend and the map. Hearing this, Tamo was deeply puzzled. He knew Lars had 2 ruby stones, but he had no idea where the third one was. Abraham revealed that the last ruby, the Bell of Ruby, was inside Dracula's body. Nearby, Malcolm kept looking at Tamo, silently pleading with him not to do anything reckless. Meanwhile, within the illusion of Dracula's memories, Alisa attempted to persuade him to let go of the knot in his heart. She reminded him that even making deals with demons couldn't change the past. Just as she spoke, Elizabeth suddenly appeared. She expressed that she didn't want Dracula to keep making mistakes. Elizabeth told him that he still had a beautiful soul, a soul that had taken the form of the spark now resting temporarily in Alisa's palm. Elizabeth's appearance shook Dracula's convictions. At this critical moment, Tamo hurriedly returned to the ship and confessed Abraham's demands to the group. Alisa declared that they must work together to find a solution. Dracula questioned why Alisa believed he would agree to such a plan. Hearing this, Alisa proposed an alliance with Dracula. They decided to join forces to eliminate Abraham first and then address their own conflicts afterward. Once Dracula agreed, both of them woke up simultaneously. To show his sincerity, Dracula finally released Calvina from her shadow vampire state, restoring her consciousness and free will. However, before heading off to resolve the knot, Alisa insisted on rescuing Malcolm and Tamo's best friend first. Calvina and Niku took the lead to scout the area and observe the Red Mask patrol patterns. Unbeknownst to Alisa, this was all part of Abraham's scheme, and he had already set a trap. While Alisa remained unaware, Dracula immediately recognized the ambush. He proposed a plan to rescue Malcolm's group. Alisa would take him as a hostage to draw Abraham's attention, allowing the others to use the distraction to rescue the captives and steal the ruby stones. Dracula also handed over a replica of the map but was still met with Ivy's distrust. To prove himself trustworthy, Dracula reluctantly regurgitated the beloved ruby from his body and gave it to Alisa for safekeeping. Meanwhile, Malcolm, who was imprisoned, refused to sit idly by. Realizing that he had turned 18 and could now forcibly manipulate human minds, he began using his ability. However, the entire base was under Abraham's influence, limiting Malcolm's powers to only 70%. While he couldn't command the Red Mask members to open the doors, he was able to order one to steal a replica of the map. The subordinate quickly succeeded in obtaining it. To avoid attracting Abraham's attention, Malcolm and Tammo decided to split the responsibility of memorizing the map, each learning one half. However, at a critical moment, Abraham suddenly returned. Spotting the subordinate under the vampire's mind control, he immediately ordered a search of everyone to check if the map had been copied or stolen. However, since Malcolm and Tammo had already memorized the map, the search revealed nothing. Meanwhile, Dracula and Alisa's group arrived at the Red Mask base, fully prepared for a fight. Abraham, too, was ready to confront them, with several ruby stones hanging from his body. Alisa presented 2 ruby stones and Dracula, who stood behind her, as leverage. She demanded that Abraham release the hostages first before she handed over the 3rd ruby. The Red Mask members brought out the 2 captives, but Malcolm shouted loudly, warning Alisa not to give Abraham the ruby. He claimed Abraham wouldn't let anyone leave alive. Abraham pretended not to hear and urged Alisa to hand over the ruby immediately. At that moment, Lars appeared and grabbed the ruby hanging around Abraham's neck. The group immediately executed their plan as chaos erupted. However, Abraham suddenly unleashed the power of the rubies, lifting the heirs into the air with his force. In that critical moment, the energy within Ivy's body exploded. Countless long, thick vines surged toward Abraham, pulling him to the ground. Taking advantage of the chaos, Dracula seized the rubies and the replica of the map, signaling the collapse of their fragile alliance. A new conflict was on the horizon. Alisa used the spark to project her consciousness out of her body and, in the blink of an eye, teleported to Dracula's car. At this point, Dracula had the map replica and the rubies, and he had secretly copied the final piece of the map that Alisa possessed while they were on the ship. That piece was the most critical part of the map. Just as Dracula was reveling in his apparent success, he suddenly heard Alisa's voice behind him. She calmly questioned, "Did you really think I'd leave the real key within your reach for you to copy?" It turned out the piece Dracula had copied was a fake. Furious, Dracula flew into a rage. When Alisa returned to the ship, Malcolm and his best friend Tammo had already recreated a replica of the map. Alisa then revealed the real key piece and used the spark to illuminate the gaps in the map, successfully pinpointing the location of the knot. On the other side, Dracula refused to give up. He tried using the ruby as a key to unlock the location of the knot. After all, the ruby contained Dracula's tears and Elizabeth's blood, which had a connection to the knot. While victory seemed near, Lars was not happy. No one knew what would happen to Alisa after the knot was undone, whether she would become half human, half vampire, and how that transformation would affect her. Alisa herself also felt uneasy. She wasn't afraid of what might happen to her, but she feared losing the people around her. After all, her grandmother and adoptive father were both over 100 years old. If they became human again, they would lose their immortality. Older vampires might even turn into nothing more than skeletons. Just as Alisa was about to undo the knot, the ship was filled with sorrow. Finally, they had reached their destination. Alisa's spark appeared once more, and she was stunned to realize that Dracula had already found the location of the knot. Moreover, they had arrived before the others. Everyone hurried to the cave where the knot was located, but to their surprise, the entrance was surrounded by holy crosses. Lars' eldest sister was puzzled by this sight. If they wanted the vampire to undo the knot, why would they set up these crosses? Alisa, upon hearing this, asked if anyone felt uncomfortable seeing the crosses. It was then that everyone realized these crosses hadn't been sanctified. They were merely used to intimidate others. Gathering their courage, they passed through the crosses, and Alisa used the light to open the stone door. Beside it, there was Dracula's ruby, indicating that he had likely used the ruby's power to open the door. Not daring to delay, they immediately entered. Ivy reminded everyone that in order to undo the knot, they would have to pass 5 tests. They had already passed the first one, the holy crosses. Now, they had to remain highly vigilant. Everyone saw Dracula standing motionless ahead, and the cave was filled with 13 mirrors. Through the first letter on each mirror, they could see that each one represented a different family. On the ground, there was a stone with the inscription, "Be yourself." They believed they needed to find the mirror corresponding to their own family, so everyone stood in front of their respective mirrors. At that moment, they saw a different version of themselves in the mirror. The consciousness consciousness of the vampires was pulled into the mirror, leaving only a lifeless body standing still in place. Niku, being human, was confused and had no idea what was happening. Meanwhile, Alisa found herself facing an evil version of herself in the illusion within the ship. She saw a vision of herself when she first left, being bullied by the other heirs. But this time, Alisa was different. She decided to fight back. The illusion claimed that this was the true Alisa, that her evil soul mirrored Dracula's. The illusion tried to deceive Alisa. Even if she undid the knot, the world would still remain dark. The illusion of Tamo was there beside him, trying to deceive the boy. The illusion claimed that Alisa didn't care about Tamo, that she only loved Lars and Niku. That's why she was so stubborn about undoing the knot, regardless of the life and death of her grandmother and the others. As Tamo seemed about to be swayed by the illusion, Alisa suddenly recalled the words on the stone. She spoke to Tamo, saying that these thoughts were truly her own, but everyone had another side to their personality. What they needed to do was to balance and suppress it, not allowing negative emotions to control them. Upon hearing Alisa's words, Tamo regained his composure. He immediately absorbed the illusion of himself. The two sisters successfully left the world inside the mirror and then showed their teammates, who were still trapped in the mirrors, the way out. After comforting and encouraging them, several of the heirs gradually woke up and they successfully passed the second test. Next, a door appeared before them. Ignoring the fact that Dracula still hadn't woken up, they continued on. Inside, there was a glowing device with the inscription, "Unity is the key to existence." Immediately after, the wall began to leak water. Everyone rushed to the wall to block the gaps, but it was useless. Malcolm recalled the glowing words on the mud, and they quickly gathered around the device. Together, they rotated it, and sure enough, the water disappeared. They had passed the third test. However, the problem was that Malcolm, Tamo, and their friend were stuck to the device. Alisa had no choice but to lead the others forward. The fourth test was a bit different. Inside the tent, there was a large drum, and the old woman had once taught Ivy how to play. In front of the drum were over a dozen stones, each carved with strange patterns. Ivy recognized the pictographs. They formed a sentence centered on the belief in one's own self-confidence. At this point, the solar eclipse had begun. Before the sun, earth, and moon aligned, they had to undo the knot before the eclipse ended. Meanwhile, Dracula had finally passed the second test, but he almost fell victim to an illusion of a beautiful world where his wife was trapped. He quickly moved on to the next test. On the other side, Ivy only needed to drum as the old woman had taught her to pass the fourth test. The inscriptions on the stone had also indicated that the key to overcoming this test was self-confidence. The support from her teammates gave Ivy the courage she needed. She grabbed the drumstick and began playing in the sequence from her memory. Sure enough, the solar eclipse temporarily paused. Lars's eldest sister stayed behind to drum with Ivy, while Alisa, Lars, and Niku continued on. The fifth test presented by the knot was extremely difficult. Alisa was forced to choose between two people, Niku and Lars. One represented the vampire side, one represented humanity. As Alisa hesitated and couldn't make up her mind, the moon above her turned red. This signified that Dracula had entered the fourth test. Alisa was forced to make a decision quickly, but it was too difficult for her. Because of those few minutes of indecision, both of her options disappeared. Instead, Dracula appeared calmly, and he had arrived so quickly because Alisa had already cleared the previous tests. Dracula's appearance made the final test change to choosing one of the three, Lars, Niku, or Elizabeth, who were now suspended in front of the knot. At that moment, Alisa's spark of fire lit up. She felt a connection between the light and Dracula, and suddenly realized something. She was not the one who could undo the knot. Dracula was. The spark of fire was Dracula's humanity, and only when it united with its owner could it influence the knot. Dracula stood before the choice, feeling utterly helpless. Alisa looked at Dracula, torn and struggling with his decision. Suddenly, she thought of another possibility. Perhaps they didn't need to change the reality. The world wasn't just about good and evil, light and darkness. They were meant to balance and suppress each other. Alisa said that they hadn't come here to undo the knot, but to destroy it. Finally, both of them understood. After Dracula bid farewell, Elizabeth personally destroyed the knot. Humans didn't turn into vampires, and vampires didn't turn into humans. The world remained as it was, with both good and evil, with everything maintaining its balance. Everything returned to its original form. Alisa finally understood her own heart. Perhaps she still liked Niku, but she had long loved Lars, the one who had always been by her side. That was the entire plot of the movie. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.